Hello there, you're following World News Live from Algiers. To the headlines. New Zionist massacre in Gaza leaves Palestinians dead and wounded. Hamas accuses Netanyahu of undermining ceasefire and renewing war. In the Middle East, Iran says talks with Washington have stopped. Trump orders halt to negotiations as Tehran warns Gulf states against supporting US military operations. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune hails national sovereignty and strong state building as hallmarks of a victorious Algeria, while General Saïd Chengriha urges following the examples of the ancestors and honoring the martyrs. Welcome to the details of our program. First, in our news, at least 9 Palestinians were killed and 15 others injured in an Israel occupation airstrike targeting a police headquarters in Gaza City, northern Gaza Strip, on Wednesday, according to medical sources in Gaza. The sources said the strike hit the police headquarters, killing 9 people, most of them police officers and personnel. 15 others were injured, most of them critically, and were transferred to Al Shifa Medical Complex for treatment. Hamas on Wednesday rejected Israeli occupation claims that it targeted resistance leaders, calling them baseless, in an attempt to justify military actions and conceal the alleged targeting of civilian police and unarmed residents in Gaza. The group described the airstrike on Gaza City police headquarters as a horrific massacre and a new war crime, accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government of violating its commitments and undermining the ceasefire agreement.
The horrific massacre committed by the criminal occupation army this afternoon, targeting the police headquarters in Gaza City, which resulted in the deaths of 9 people, most of them police officers and personnel, and the injury of a number of civilians, constitutes yet another Zionist war crime. It exposes the insistence of the government of war criminal Netanyahu in evading its commitment and its practical refusal to move forward with the implementation of the ceasefire agreement and complete its remaining phases. We affirm that the occupation army's claims that it targeted resistance leaders are completely baseless. These are false allegations being promoted to justify its aggression and cover up its deliberate targeting of the civilian police force and unarmed civilians in the Gaza Strip.
Hamas added that the escalation and what it described as the systematic targeting of civilian police and institutions responsible for maintaining public security and order were further evidence, in its view, of the Israeli occupation's efforts to create a state of chaos and lawlessness in the Gaza Strip.
This criminal escalation and systemic targeting of the civilian police force and institutions responsible for maintaining security and public order also reveal the occupation's efforts to create a state of chaos and lawlessness in the Gaza Strip and to undermine the foundations of life and stability there, in furtherance of displacement plans that the occupation's leaders continue to seek to impose on our people. We call on mediators and guarantors of the agreement, foremost among them the administration of the President Trump, to take a clear and firm position regarding this dangerous escalation, to act immediately to halt the occupation's crimes and violations, and to compel the Netanyahu governments to abide by what was agreed upon.
7 Palestinians, including a child, were killed and 10 others injured, some critically, in an occupation drone strike on a cafe at Gaza City's old seaport on Tuesday evening. According to medical sources at Al Shifa Hospital, ambulance and civil defense teams transported the victims and injured to the hospital for treatment.
We were sitting in the park when we saw this place targeted. We are displaced people. We saw injuries among children, young people, and the elderly. May God punish them. How long will we remain in this war?
The United Nations has warned of worsening security and humanitarian conditions for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, citing rise in violence, expanding Israeli occupation settlements, tighter movement restrictions, and decline in economic opportunities. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said Tuesday the organization was deeply concerned by recent developments, including occupation army orders for around 10 Palestinian families in Tulkarem's Jebel al-Nasser neighborhood to temporarily leave their homes.
Turning to a situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, I can tell you that we're deeply alarmed by the continued deterioration of security and humanitarian situations for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that in the northern West Bank yesterday, Israeli forces instructed about 10 Palestinian families in Jebel al-Nasser neighborhood in Tulkarem to leave their homes for a number of hours due to military activities near the adjacent Nur Shams camp for Palestine refugees.
In the same context, the UN Secretary-General spokesperson added that the scale of humanitarian needs in Gaza remains immense. He also referred to warnings from the Food and Agriculture Organization FAO about the consequences of the destruction of Gaza's agricultural capacity amid continued operations and their impact on civilians across the Strip.
These incidents are taking place against a backdrop of broader deterioration in the area where escalating violence, expanding Israeli settler presence, severe restrictions on movements and access for Palestinians, and shrinking economic opportunities have become the norm. Turning to Gaza, we and our partners continue to deliver aid to support essential services and to facilitate critical humanitarian operations wherever it is possible for us to do so.
Israel occupation forces launched raids and arrests across the West Bank on Wednesday, sparking clashes and the use of stun and tear gas grenades. Palestinian media reported raids in Bethlehem, Nablus, Kalkaliye, Al-Khalil, Ramallah, Jenin, Jericho, Al-Quds and Tulkarem, with several Palestinians arrested, roads blocked and homes temporarily turned into military posts. The Israeli occupation has resumed military escalation in Gaza despite ceasefire talks, causing Palestinian casualties and expanding operations into Syria. The escalation comes as Hamas negotiates the agreement's second phase and amid reported Zionist pressure on Washington over Iran. Nabil Khazini reports now.
At a funeral in Gaza, tears fall where there should have been silence. Faces carry the weight of another loss. The ceasefire was meant to hold, yet the bombs have not stopped. In Gaza, the devastation stretches beyond the blast sites. Homes lie broken. Families remain displaced. Humanitarian needs deepen as access to food, water, and medical care remains severely constrained.
We woke up to a hate strike. They killed the people, from the elderly, children, and women. And they say we are speaking about a truce. Every day we say that there is hope tomorrow. There is hope after tomorrow. But the number of martyrs is increasing. Let the people grieve on us. Yesterday it was at the port, and today at the municipality park that is full of children.
And the violence does not stop at Gaza's borders. On Tuesday, 8 Zionist strikes hit Abu Duhur air base in northwestern Syria. The runway and storage areas were damaged. No casualties were reported. The attack drew condemnation from Damascus, while Washington warned of a dangerous escalation. Across the region, the picture is increasingly bleak. In Gaza, reconstruction remains stalled. In the occupied West Bank, violence and displacement continue to rise. The United Nations has repeatedly warned of the mounting risks to civilians and humanitarian workers.
It's a tough day for us. It's a somber day for us, and I join you in paying tribute to humanitarians who run these extraordinary risks that they shouldn't have to run. It is the normalization of violence against our community, and we will not accept it. We do not accept it. We will not allow this violence, this killing of humanitarians to be normalized. And so we do grieve today. The
ceasefire may have quietened some of the guns, but the ruins remain. The funerals continue, and across the occupied Palestine and Syria, the shadow of the conflict still hangs over lives already torn apart.
Always in the Middle East, Iranian Fars news agency quoted a source close to the negotiating delegation as saying that talks with the United States had been suspended following what the source described as Washington's violation of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The source said negotiations over sovereignty arrangements concerning the Strait of Hormuz had been conducted with Oman and were unrelated to the United States. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said U.S. economic and military pressure on Iran would not force concessions, calling Washington's strategy a miscalculation. He cited reported U.S. efforts to pressure Iran through a naval blockade and new sanctions, saying such measures were not part of previous agreements and would yield no results.
The Americans think that by intensifying pressure on Iran, they can obtain concessions that were never part of the text of the joint understanding. Besant and Hegseth are not at all apt to the task. Don't expect this clownish team to perform miracles, or to suddenly put a rabbit out of a hat like magicians to save you from a crisis you created yourselves.
U.S. President Donald Trump has instructed his senior envoys to suspend talks with Iran after weeks of negotiations failed to make significant progress. According to a U.S. official cited by CNN, the move signals a shift from rapid to gradual pressure on Tehran, despite officials describing recent talks as positive. Iran has stressed the need to guarantee its security either through diplomatic means or military action by achieving a state of deterrence. Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Naqvi, a senior advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, said in an interview with RT published on Tuesday that achieving such deterrence was necessary in confronting Iran's adversaries.
We must reach a state of deterrence, because if someone attacks Iran and then retreats after failing and suffering a blow, returns to their country, reorganizes their ranks, and then comes back after 6 months, that will be a very unfavorable situation for us. Ensuring Iran's security is essential, whether through diplomacy or war. Iran's security must be guaranteed. The principle is that diplomacy and war are not the essence of the matter in themselves. Rather, they are merely tools. Both are methods and means, nothing more. We must restore our deterrence. How does that happen? It should be clear that Iran's violation will have a price.
The senior advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stressed that the United States had failed to achieve its objectives in the war against Iran.
The United States government announced 2 main objectives in this war: the overthrow of the Iranian government and to partition Iran. These were their primary goals. They failed from the outset. They had a very short-sighted vision based on the characteristics I mentioned earlier. They thought that in 3 or 4 days, for example, they could overthrow the Iranian government or partition Iran. Clearly, this was a very delusional idea.
In the same context, Iranian General Mohammad Reza Naqvi added that the Strait of Hormuz would never lose its strategic importance, reaffirming Iran's control over the vital waterway.
The Strait of Hormuz will never lose its importance. This is an oil and gas production site, meaning the Gulf itself is an oil and gas production site. Whatever happens here, regardless of where they want to take it, the production takes place here, which means it's under control. This is the oil production site. Oil wells can't be moved elsewhere. At most, they load it onto ships or use pipelines to transport it elsewhere. Well, this pipeline is under control again, which means it's vulnerable to damage.
Iran warned Gulf states on Wednesday against providing any assistance to the U.S. military in its operations against the Islamic Republic. Iran's Imahar news agency quoted Major General Ali Abdullahi, Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, as saying that any assistance or facilitation provided to the U.S. military would, in his words, mount to participation in American military operations against Iran. A NATO official told Reuters on Wednesday that the alliance was prepared to defend all member states against any Iranian threat. The official said NATO's deterrence and air defenses remain strong, noting that Iranian ballistic missiles headed toward Turkey have been intercepted on 4 occasions this year. South Korea said a message from US President Donald Trump ordering a reduction in joint military exercises appeared to put pressure on Seoul to become involved in the war with Iran. South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Yoon told a parliamentary hearing on Wednesday that South Korean and US officials had not been informed in advance of Trump's order to scale back the joint military exercises. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune said the country's pivotal historical milestones, including the anniversary of the August 20th, 1955 North Constantine Offensive and the Soumam Congress, highlight the symbolic importance of the Mujahid or war veterans in the nation's collective memory, while underscoring with pride Algeria's present as a victorious nation. In a message marking National Mujahid Day, Tebboune said this present was reflected in safeguarding national sovereignty and strengthening the foundations of a strong state with robust institutions supported by the awareness of its youth and the unity of its people. President Abdelmadjid Tebboune added that the legacy of Algeria's martyrs and mujahideen remains alive, continuing to inspire the country and drive it toward greater leadership and achievement.
If 20 August 1955 reflected a strategy of confronting the enemy's forces on the battlefield, then 20 August 1956 marked a qualitative turning point, shaping a multidimensional strategy that established a new balance among the parties to the conflict in terms of planning and organization. The National Liberation Revolution thus became the force that transformed the equation of traditional colonialism, not only in Algeria, but for oppressed peoples around the world. Such political historical moment, while reminding us of the symbolism of the Mujahid and the esteemed place he or she holds in the nation's collective memory, also provide an opportunity to proudly celebrate today's Algeria, victorious Algeria, whose strength lies in safeguarding national sovereignty and advancing the construction of a strong state, supported by its institutions and sustained by the awareness of its youth and the solidarity of its people. In this way, the message of the martyrs and mujahideen lives on, shining through their spirit of sacrifice and inspiring our nation to strive for ever greater heights, distinction, and leadership. On this immortal occasion, I call upon today's generation to carry forward the mission of our fathers and forefathers, to draw inspiration from their immense sacrifices, and to build upon the legacy they entrusted to us, so that we may continue advancing our nation and fulfilling the aspirations of the glorious November generation.
Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune said the anniversaries of the North Constantine Offensive and the Soumam Congress reflect the strategic vision of the November generation in sustaining and expanding the revolution in line with the goals of the November 1st Declaration.
What this commemoration holds is a legacy of ingenuity that inspired the exceptional generation of November to preserve the flame of the revolution whose spark they had ignited, while adapting it to the imperatives of development, expansion and outreach within the framework of the objectives set out in the first November Declaration. It also reflects their determination to confront the strategic plans of the colonial authorities, who clung to the illusion of keeping Algeria under the yoke of occupation and maintaining their control over it, resorting to any means necessary to thwart the Algerian people's aspiration to live in freedom and independence.
President Tebboune said the North Constantine offensive, led by martyr Zeroud Youssef, embodied national unity and solidarity, offering lessons for Algeria's present and future. He also praised the Soumam Congress for organizing the revolution's military, political and media efforts against French colonial rule, backed by NATO.
The North Constantine offensives, led by the iconic martyr Zeroud Youssef, were and will remain, with their strength, heroism, comprehensiveness, and unwavering determination, reflecting the highest values under the banner of the National Liberation Front and Army. They offer profound historical lessons that serve as a beacon for the present and future. Lessons for all, near and far, demonstrating that Algeria was and will remain steadfast in its cohesion, solidarity, and national unity, a blessing bestowed upon it by God Almighty. Furthermore, the National Mujahid Day is closely linked to the anniversary of the Soumam Congress, the historic congress that envisioned a comprehensive project for organizing and managing the revolution in its military, logistical, and organizational dimensions, as well as its legislative dimension. This involved establishing institutions to translate the revolution's principles into action across all fields, particularly military, political, and media, and to promote it in international forums. Thus, this historic Congress framed the revolutionary project in all its dimensions to confront the most powerful colonial force of the time, supported by NATO.
Meanwhile, Algeria's minister delegate to the Minister of National Defense and Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, General Saïd Chengriha, called for following in the footsteps of the country's forebears in loyalty to the legacy of the martyrs and in pursuit of the aspirations of the Algerian people. In a message marking National Mujahid Day, Chengriha stressed that Algeria's history, rich in heroism and glory, requires every loyal patriot to reflect on the country's victorious struggle, draw lessons from its experience, and recognize that nation building is a responsibility shared by all its faithful citizens.
Institutionalizing the commemoration of these two major events from the history of our immortal liberation revolution is a recognition and glorification of the sacrifices made by the valiant heroes of the National Liberation Army and the heroism they displayed. Our country's history, rich with heroics and glories across various eras and ages, calls upon every sincere patriot to pause in contemplation and reflection upon our people's victorious journey, to draw lessons and insights, and realize that the homeland is built by the arms and efforts of all its loyal sons. The willpower and determination of our proud people have never wavered, whether in confronting brutal French colonialism before enduring the blessed liberation revolution, or in standing up against the abhorrent phenomenon of terrorism. We're all called upon today and tomorrow to follow the example of our blessed ancestors, so that we may truly rise to the level of the sacred trust we are honored to preserve and fulfill.
African Parliament President Fatah Boutbik said Africa's current challenges make peace, security and stability a shared continental responsibility, requiring closer coordination among African Union institutions. Speaking at the opening of the 2026 Joint Consultative Meeting between the African Union Peace and Security Council and the Pan-African Parliament in Addis Ababa on Wednesday, Boutbik said the Peace and Security Council plays a central role in Africa's peace and security architecture. The meeting was co-chaired by Boutbik and Mohamed Khalid, Algeria's permanent representative to the African Union and chair of the Council. Boutbik said the Pan-African Parliament adds a parliamentary and popular dimension to the continental framework, helping bridge continental decision-making with national realities and citizens' aspirations.
That's why we say that this role requires a joint effort by all the institutions affiliated with the African Union. Within this framework, the Peace and Security Council fulfills its central responsibility within Africa's peace and security architecture, while the Pan-African Parliament adds an indispensable dimension to that system, the parliamentary and popular dimension. The Parliament gives these decisions their spirit and helps accompany them through their implementation and outcomes. Its aim is therefore to foster public awareness and promote the idea of a people-centered Africa, while supporting these efforts and priorities through popular engagement. In this way, it connects realities on the ground with solutions and brings people and institutions together in a continuous, mutually reinforcing cycle.
Pan-African Parliament President Fattah Bouteflika said the body seeks to complement, not duplicate, the work of the African Union Peace and Security Council. He called for a sustainable partnership focused on coordination, joint action and conflict prevention, making it a model of AU institutional cooperation and advancing African solutions to African problems. And with this, we come to the end of our news bulletin. Thank you for your kind attention. See you next time.